Welcome to another episode of the Life of Elvis podcast. I'm your host, Elvis, and today with me is Kristy Sumner, the founder of Soul Sisters Paranormal, who is a paranormal investigator. And this is an episode I've been really looking forward to for, what was it, a month or two? So, welcome on the podcast.
Thank you, Elvis. I appreciate you having me on tonight.
Yeah, glad you're here. So, tell me how you get to do all these things.
Well, it's an interesting road, let me tell you. My sisters and I, we all live in different parts of the U.S., and we would routinely get together to have girls' trips and girls' weekends. And so one weekend in 2013, we decided to do something a little bit different, and we met up in Moundsville, West Virginia, which is where the West Virginia State Penitentiary is located. And that's supposed to be one of the most haunted locations in the U.S. And we had a friend of the family that sat on the board of that facility. And he said, while you're in the area, why don't you just spend the night in the penitentiary that was closed since 1995? Why don't you spend the night in the penitentiary and see if you can communicate with our resident spirits? So we jumped at that opportunity. We took some voice recorders, a couple of digital cameras, and we left that experience with what we found was unexplainable paranormal evidence. We were capturing footsteps. We were hearing door slams in cell blocks when we knew that nobody was there, capturing men's voices when there were no men present in the area. And so that really kind of catapulted us into wanting to delve into this further, the investigation of the afterlife, and really visit historic locations and tell the historical narrative of those locations and couple that with any unexplainable evidence that we find. So really that's what we've been doing since 2014.
Mm-hmm. And what's your background?
I actually have a PhD in public affairs with an emphasis on criminal justice. So I spent a lot of time in the corporate world, really looking at aviation security and biometric identification clearances. And my sister has a PhD. We've got a couple lawyers on the team. We have a master's holder on the team. So that really kind of sets us apart a little bit from other paranormal investigators because we all have advanced degrees and we really want to find the scientific explanation between what's happening and what we see on these investigations. So we really approach it with a scientific mindset of trying to debunk some of the claims to see if we can see if there's any environmental factors that are causing people to think that there's a quote unquote haunting in the locations that we're visiting. So that's really kind of how we approach our investigations. But yeah, my background was more of a corporate type of a background before I kind of delved into this.
No, that's pretty good because that's the kind of approach we need with these kinds of things.
Mm-hmm.
Because let's face it, there's a lot of wacky stuff around there. You know, you got all these TV shows which are just most of the time just no good.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
this is exactly what we need with all these paranormal, high strangeness phenomena, proper scientific research, and see really what's going on there.
Yeah. And, a lot of people, their whole influence about the paranormal, to your point, really comes from television shows and movies that are made to sensationalize. And their entire goal for being is to get audiences and audience feedback and audience participation. And so for us, we kind of take it a little bit different approach to your point and really try to debunk things first. So, for example, we were called in to investigate this local business. And he was convinced that his place was haunted because his night vision video cameras during the night would flash on and off with these, bright flashes and such. So he called us in 100% convinced that the building was haunted. And so the way the building is situated, it's a long, narrow storefront, and it has glass windows. It has mirrors going down the sides. He has some display cases and such, and it runs perpendicular to a road. And on that road was a high volume of U-turn traffic. So at night, the headlights would come in and bounce into his storefront, hit the mirrors, and essentially blind his night vision video cameras to where they would turn off and turn back on. And so when we discovered that, we told him, I don't think your place is haunted. Either move the mirrors or move the position of your cameras, and I think the quote unquote haunting will stop. And it did. So that's what we try to do. We try to look for environmental factors first, and then when we control for all the environmental factors that we can, what we're left with is what we call the unexplainable.
Yeah, that makes totally sense. A lot of the stuff that people see, maybe they think that it's a UFO, it's ghosts, something else. When many times it can be something normal. Let's just
Hmm.
say, but it
Yeah.
doesn't
Now
mean that there's no a certain percentage which can't be explained.
you're absolutely right. And that's just where I was going to go with my next statement is, we have found things that we can't explain. For example, we're an all female team. And so when we're in a
Mm-hmm.
location and we capture men's voices or children's voices, automatically we can rule ourselves out because that's not us. We have no children on the team. We don't have any men on the team, and there's no men on the property when we're investigating these locations. And so we can quickly rule that out as what we call unexplainable. And so for us, we've captured a large amount of things that we can't explain. Again, when we control for all of those other things that we can't explain, noises, voices, shadow figures, different apparitions that we've seen that we have no logical explanation for in that moment.
Mm-hmm. So how do you conduct your research? Let's say when you go to a certain place, what do you do over there?
Well, so the first thing that we do is we'll go to the location during the day and we'll take a day tour and really walk around and take notes of basically everything that we see. So, where is there vehicular traffic? Is there airplanes that fly overhead? Is there any trains in the area or dogs or kids or anything like that? And so, we really wanted to look at it in the daylight to really find those environmental factors that, we can kind of explain away, and then also to stake out where we want to put our stationary night vision video cameras and voice recorders when we do the investigation. So then we'll go back in during the night, we'll set up all of our equipment, and then we go through the location really anywhere from 8, 12 to sometimes 24 hours. And we'll do what we call EVP sessions. So basically, that means we'll sit in the darkness and ask questions. We'll use various pieces of handheld equipment designed for paranormal investigations. And we'll attempt to communicate with any spirit in the location. And after that, we will, leave, collect all of our audio and video recordings, and then we sit down and we listen to every stitch of audio that we captured, and we watch every piece of video footage that we captured. So if I've got 10 voice recorders running for 10 hours, I'm listening to 100 hours of audio. And then when we find something that we can't explain, we'll put that in our evidence folder, and then we'll create a video really documenting the history of the location, and then coupling that with the unexplained things that we found in that location.
That's very thorough.
Yeah, we have a formal process for sure. It's one of those
Mm-hmm.
things that for us really works. A lot of people will go in and make it more like a TikTok adventure or an Instagram adventure where they're very in out very quick, really not giving a nod to the historical perspective of the location. And we're a little bit different. We think the history of the location is very important to what we do, and so the first anywhere from 2 to 6 minutes of each of our videos really details the history and why it's important, and that really allows us to go into why we think a place could be haunted because of those events of the past. And so that's really how we build our investigations and put together our research.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. And just now that you said the history of a place and how it can affect stuff, it's one thing came to my mind for my late teens, early 20s, because I'm originally from Slovakia. Right?
Okay.
Then I moved to the UK. Now I'm in Sweden, and in the town where I was born in, I had a good friend. We would always, hang out together and walk around the town. But there was this one thing that we always did. That there was the area where I lived, where I spent the first 20 years of my life. We would totally avoid it. We would never go there. All the other places in town, yeah, it's fine. We would go there, but not there. And one time we talked about it, and we both felt it, like there's something off in that place. It's
Okay.
some kind of vibe. That we just rather just stay away from it. And there was like a big bridge, and from the bridge onwards, I was like, nah, you're not going there. Weirdly enough, before I left Slovakia, there were a few things within my family. Also a few other things that just came up. So apparently in that part of the town where I lived, which we always avoided, apparently the Nazis did some really nasty stuff over there during World War II.
Wow.
Like killing some people and all that
Mm-hmm.
stuff. And I've heard from other people that, for example, someone was alone in the flat, because there were like 8-story buildings with loads of flats in them, built just like around the end of communism or shortly after the revolution over there.
Okay.
And this person, for example, was listening to some stuff through the earphone alone at home, and suddenly just hears men's voice like coming from very close, or maybe if not even from the earphones. It's like, what's going on?
Mm-hmm.
Or people heard some noises from the other room on the other side of the wall when there was no one there.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
So that was something that I've experienced over there.
Mm-hmm.
And many times you can feel that something is off in such places, can you?
Oh yeah. Yeah, absolutely. There's definitely a different vibe in some of the locations that we go to. Now, we've investigated dozens of places, and I can honestly say that we've never experienced anything that was evil or malicious or demonic or anything like that. But then again, we don't go looking for that type of haunting either. The entities that we've spoken to or we've communicated with, to us, the theory that we use is that they had a human existence, right? They were born, they lived, they died, and they're really just able to tell their stories to us or able to communicate with us. And so those are the entities that we really approach and communicate with. But you're right, there is a different vibe when you go into a prison or a lighthouse or a former insane asylum. You really kind of take on that historical perspective. I get to have a very tactile experience with these locations. I get to, put my hands on the wall of a maximum security prison that was, in operation from 1896, or I get to climb the steps of the St. Augustine Lighthouse and really have that experience. And it is different depending on where you go and the events that happen there. You can really, if you really kind of let yourself feel that, you can feel that history. It's essentially an immersion into history.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It almost feels like the people that were there and all the events that happened, it kind of leaves an imprint in those places.
Exactly right. That's
And
exactly
people
right.
also have their own vibes, just like
Mm-hmm.
these places. Like especially over the last year or so, my intuition has been for some reason getting better and better. And I meet someone, I can feel like there's some kind of a connection there, or I'm gonna stay away from this person,
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
for
and
example.
that yeah, and you're absolutely right. For us, we go into a location with what I call the right intentions. And what I mean by that is we go in with a sense of respect for the property and the location, as well as a sense of respect for any entities that we're trying to communicate with. And I think because of that approach, we've been very fortunate to capture things that we can't explain, that entities want to tell their stories to us. And if you watch any of our videos, that's really kind of the theme throughout. You'll hear us say, we're here to tell your story. We want to tell your story. The very core of human existence is to be recognized, right? Nobody wants to go through life thinking that they're invisible. And I think the same thing is true with some of these spirits that we're trying to communicate with. They want to be recognized. They want their story told. And they want people to believe that they exist. And so for us, that's how, again, we approach our investigations, from taking it from that perspective.
So, in which states have you done most of your research
Oh
in the
goodness.
U.S.?
Yeah. So we've really been all over the U.S. We've done several investigations in Florida, Tennessee, the New England states. We've been to Massachusetts, North Carolina. We've done several investigations there. Iowa. We've been out to Iowa, Ohio, West Virginia. So we've really gotten around. Like I said, we've done probably about a couple dozen what I would call quote unquote commercial investigations. And these are locations that, they're open to the public. They have a commercial presence, and then we go in and investigate those. And that's a little bit different from the private investigations that we do, where a homeowner or a business will call us in. So that they're a little bit different in kind of how we approach them. But yeah, we've been all over the country.
Nice. And have you found that West Virginia was kind of different from the other states in some ways?
West Virginia does have a certain vibe. As you
Mm-hmm.
know, we spoke about different vibes, and the locations that we've investigated there. We've investigated a prison, a former maximum security prison, which was in operation from 1876 to 1995, and then we investigated a former insane asylum, which was in operation from 1864 to 1994. And it's interesting because we actually have a familial connection with those. Our grandpa was a prison guard in the penitentiary, and then he also had to transport patients to the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum. So that's kind of interesting for us. But West Virginia does have a very interesting history. You got the coal miners, you've got the Appalachian Mountains going through there and such. And so the places that we've investigated there have been very active. And I know that West Virginia, Ohio, that in little corridor there have numerous locations that paranormal investigators can go to because they're so active.
That's interesting. Because
Mm-hmm.
when I was probably in my teens, we were on a trip from school,
Mm-hmm.
and when we did a stop in this town where my dad used to work, not far from where I lived. We went to like a shopping mall or something like that, and I found this book. It was
Mm-hmm.
super cheap, and it was from John Keel. I think was it Mothman Prophecies was the name
Yeah,
of the book as well.
the Mothman.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that one. It was just translated in some different title because it
Mm-hmm.
was in Czech. Uh, where I bought the book, but man, that book was so amazing.
Yeah.
And
The
that
the
he mentioned also West Virginia over there, because obviously it was, for those who don't know, uh, in the 60s there was these high strangeness events in Point Pleasant in West Virginia, which included this creature, the Mothman, which was like, I don't know, 7 or 8 feet tall with wings and big red eyes. Then
mm-hmm.
there was some UFO sightings, and at the end there was this bridge which came down. So lots of stuff happening over there.
Mm-hmm.
And he mentioned at one point that West Virginia is kind of different from the other states. If I remember right, he said that even the Native Americans, they kind of avoided that place,
Mm-hmm.
and that there's some stone structures they were like really old, but no one really knows who built them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's kind of how Moundsville, West Virginia is. It does have a great heritage of Native American influence there. In Moundsville, it's named after Indian burial mounds. So,
Hmm.
literally 40 feet from the entrance of the Moundsville, West Virginia State Penitentiary is this huge Indian burial mound. And that they're really they permeate throughout that area. So there is a Native American influence there. And they're obviously, with the Native American influence, you have the Native American legend and lore. And so that's really how a lot of these stories take place. And that kind of, morphs from Native American into the early Appalachians, to present day. And they really just kind of take that legend and lore and kind of morph it into what we know today. And so the Mothman is a very, very big legend there in West Virginia.
Hmm.
A lot of people go to try to find him. To your point, in the 60s and 70s, there was a lot of sightings of this creature, and it has a very different a different atmosphere to it. And like I said, that West Virginia, Ohio, that whole little corridor there has a lot of influence, both from Native American and then moving into to present day.
Right. Would love to visit at some point. Hopefully
It's
that's gonna
beautiful.
happen.
It's a beautiful area.
I bet. Yeah. I mean, must be a lot to see in the States, but anyway.
Mhm.
Are there still some Mothman sightings going on these days, or something similar in on the
Yeah,
area?
Yeah, absolutely. So people claim to see the Mothman, as well as Bigfoot. So there's a lot of, a lot of cryptid activity
Hmm.
in that area. A lot of UFO sightings as well. Again, just because of the nature of where it's located, I think. And for us, I do think that cryptids are a possibility. It's not so much of what we do. We're more on the paranormal side. But I know several people who go routinely to West Virginia to try to find the Mothman, to try to find Bigfoot, and they've made some very interesting claims, things that are really hard for me to debunk otherwise. When you have these individuals that are recording sounds and and getting footprints and impressions and all of that. it really leads you to believe that there's something out there for sure.
Yeah, might be.
Hmm.
And to be fair, the distinction that Bigfoot or the Mothman or some of these cryptids that they're not paranormal I've heard some people say that it might be way more connected than we think.
Oh yeah, absolutely. There's definitely that parallel. There's been several theories that exist that says the paranormal is really just being able to communicate on a different plane, right? That these
Mm-hmm.
planes are just running together with our planes, kind of like in lockstep,
Yeah.
and that the cryptids are able to jump between those more physically than the spirits that we're communicating with. And so, yeah, absolutely. So there's a lot of theories that coexist between the cryptid community as well as the paranormal community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've also heard whilst we're on this topic, many times when they see a Bigfoot, many times they see also some UFOs around, or
Hmm.
the other way around.
Hmm.
So who knows what's going on there, really?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's the whole genre really of all of this and how it kind of
Yeah.
coexists. Again, some people think that the UFOs are on that parallel plane as well with the
Mm-hmm.
paranormal. That's what we're really communicating with, right? So entities and beings from another dimension or plane, if you will.
Yeah. There was kind of even John Keel, when I was reading his book, that was kind of his theory. He didn't think that UFOs were necessarily spaceships from another solar system, but he thought there was something together with Mothman and all these other things that we was talking about. It was something that's always been here on
Hmm.
Earth
Hmm.
with us. It's just I remember he talked about this writer where in his house there was this writer who would write books, and after he passed away or moved out, the tenants they would see a person like in a dark coat with a hat. I'm not sure if I remember correctly, like a apparition or a ghost or something like that, walking around. Which turns out that was a character from his book. So he made this point, John Keel, that yeah, his fantasy, whatever he was imagining whilst writing these books, kind of imprinted on the house, and
Hmm.
it manifested itself
Hmm.
in something that other people were able to actually see.
Hmm.
Which I think it was, he, I think the term was tulpa, but I'm not quite sure. Which is a
Hmm.
Tibetan term,
Okay.
because they also know about these things when you can bring something into existence through your thought,
Yeah.
and they have their own term for that. So he was thinking that maybe all these things are kind of something on this level.
Mhm. No, absolutely. So, the theory of quote unquote creating your own haunting is absolutely something that you have to take into account, right? That you go into these
Mm-hmm.
locations or in your house and you believe in something so strongly that to your point, it manifests, right? That you think over and over and over again that there's a shadow person standing in the corner to the point where your mind is so powerful that it essentially creates that haunting. So that's something that we absolutely study and look at in the paranormal community.
Yeah, and there's also these poltergeist events and
Mhm.
sightings where it seems like it's not really some kind of a external ghost just haunting around, but many times there's a adolescent person in the household
Mhm.
who seems to be projecting these kinds of things.
Mhm. Yeah. Again, poltergeist, another interesting phenomena in the paranormal community. Personally, I don't think we've ever experienced a poltergeist.
Mm-hmm.
Again, and not a demon or anything like that as well. For us, a demon and a poltergeist, that in my mind, they never really had a human existence, right? They're essentially the manifestation of the evil, of the good and the evil in the world. And because we don't go looking for that or really trying to seek that out, I think we've been fortunate enough not to encounter something like that. Because, again, we're trying to communicate with those that had some type of a human existence. And that's what we kind of recognize, at least for us personally. That's just how we operate on Soul Sisters. And so,
Mm-hmm.
again, we've never really experienced anything like that, but I know of many people in the paranormal community who have.
Right. So tell me about one of the best cases you can think of. What happened there?
Well, a lot of the locations that we've gone to have been very rich in history and also very rich in paranormal activity. I think one of the most interesting cases for us was the Ma Barker house in Central Florida. Now, this is the site of the 1935 shootout between members of the FBI and two members of the Barker Carpus gang, Ma Barker and Fred Barker. Now, the Barker Carpus gang was a very prolific gang in the 1920s, early 1930s. They would crisscross the Midwest, robbing banks, having shootouts with law enforcement, and they would cross these jurisdictional state lines to the point where they were really kind of not being apprehended by the law, right? So again, it was a very prolific gang, and then they kind of morphed into kidnappers. So they would kidnap these high-profile individuals, hold them for ransom, then split up the loot and
Mm-hmm.
disperse for a few months. So anyway, in 1935, Ma and Fred Barker went to this Central Florida house, and they used it as a hideout. So in November of 1934, they rented this house. They were using it as a hideout from J. Edgar Hoover and his members of the FBI. In January of 1935, J. Edgar Hoover found them in this house. He surrounded the house with FBI agents, and a gunfight ensued. And it was the longest gun battle in FBI history. And it culminated with Ma and Fred Barker being killed in the upstairs of this house. And so after that, after the shootout happened, the owners of the house really had the presence of mind to preserve it as it was in 1935. So when you go into it today, there's bullet holes in the wall, there's bullet holes in the furniture. It's all the furniture that was there from 1935. I mean, you can line up a rocking chair, the back of a rocking chair, to a bullet hole in the wall, and you can see where the bullet went through the chair and into the wall. So anyway, so in 2016, the Marion County ended up buying the house from the original owners, and they moved it. They moved this entire 2-story house. They put it on a barge and floated it across the lake. And now it sits in this about 40 acres of Florida wilderness, essentially. And so when we investigated there, we were the very first team allowed to investigate this house. And as I said before, it sits by itself on about 40 acres. So there's no light pollution. There's no noise pollution. Nobody can get back to it unless they have a 4-wheel drive vehicle to get through the Florida sand. And so we had complete control of that environment. We knew we had it really locked down. And so we investigated for over 2 nights. The first night was the 83rd anniversary of the shootout. So we left some equipment there and we left it run. We locked the house and left. I just wanted the stationary equipment to run by itself for that night. And when we came back and we went through all of the audio and video footage, we were hearing things like chairs being dragged across the floor. We were hearing a man's voice saying, "Get out," when, again, there's nobody in this house. And then at about 5:30 in the morning, which is when the shootout would have happened 83 years prior, we captured 2 voices. One said, "Freddie." The next one said, "Yeah, Ma." The first one said, "Get ready." And I think that's what we call a residual haunting. I think that that's what they actually said in 1935. So then we went back a second night. It was just my twin sister and I in the house. We stayed for probably about 6 or 7 hours. And we were capturing things again that we couldn't explain. There was an instance where we were up in the room where Ma and Fred Barker were killed. And we have a device called a spirit box. And essentially it's an AM FM radio that's been modified to sweep through frequencies. So when you turn it on, it goes very fast through these AM and FM frequencies. So it sounds like as it's running through these frequencies. So I asked what happened in this room. And through that spirit box, we got the phrase, "They murdered us, we the ones dead." Now, when you think about that, this spirit box every 1/8 of a second is switching to a new frequency. So it is extremely unlikely that you're going to get a full phrase coming through that spirit box. And so when it said that to me was extremely telling. And so there was some other things that happened that night. Again, we were capturing voices and footsteps and stuff. So for me, I think that is probably, if I could call it the most pure investigation, it's that one, because we had such control of everything else around us. And we were still picking up these very interesting things that we couldn't explain. And so that to me is probably, the quintessential example of what a paranormal investigation should be.
Mm-hmm. Oh man, that sounds so interesting. So do you think that these people that died over there, that it's part of their consciousness which is still there, or is it just an imprint of something that happened that doesn't have its own consciousness?
And that's a great question. So we operate on the theory that there's two types of hauntings. The first one is what we call a residual haunting. And that is basically the best way that I can describe it. It's an imprint in time. And so if you think of a vinyl record that's on a record player and there's a scratch on that record, every time it hits the needle, it's going to blip, right? You're going to hear it. And so if you think of time in that same manner, every time an anniversary happens or some significant thing happens, it's going to blip. And so that's to me is a residual haunting, whether it be footsteps, whether it be voices, something triggers that, essentially that blip, and it's residual. It's not intelligent. It doesn't know we're there. It's not responding to us in any way. It's just going to happen, right? Because it's that blip.
Mm-hmm.
That's residual. An intelligent haunting is something that the spirit actually communicates with us. We ask a question and it responds in an intelligent manner. So for example, there's been numerous times where we've been sitting in a location and I say, "What's my name?" And we get a response of Kristy. Or for example, my sister and I we investigated the USS North Carolina, which is a battleship that's in Wilmington, North Carolina. It was a battleship that was in World War II. Jenny and I were the only two people on the ship that night. And so we're walking into the sick bay area, and you've got to go through, if you imagine a battleship, there's all these hatchway doors, they're kind of narrow and you got to step over them as you're going through this battleship. And we're going into the sick bay area. And you hear me say to Jenny, "Do you want to sit in here and sit here for a few minutes?" And she says, "Yes." So as I step into that hatchway, a man's voice said, "Just watch your arm." And to me, that's very telling, right? It sees us coming into this area. It maybe knows that this is an area where people bang their elbows or something, and it's telling me to watch my arm. So that is, to me, an intelligent haunting. It sees us. It's communicating with us in some way. There was another instance that same night where Jenny and I were standing there. We were conducting an EVP session. And Jenny goes, "My name's Jenny." And I say, "My name's Kristy." And Jenny said, "We're here to tell your story. Will you talk to us?" And both of us at the same time heard a man's voice behind us saying, "Talk to her." Again, very intelligent. It hears us, it sees us, and it's willing to communicate with us.
Honestly, been interested in this kind of stuff since my early childhood, since I can remember, really.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
I think a lot of, I think a lot of people really have that interest, because it is something that is going to affect us all, right? Everybody is going to have this death experience. And I think a lot of people, most people believe that something is going to happen afterwards. To me, just thinking that I'm going to close my eyes and just cease to be, that's a pretty terrifying thought. So a lot of people have that innate sense of wonder and curiosity about what happens next. And for me, this journey has really kind of enlightened me to the fact that something does happen, right? Something you're going to go somewhere. Energy cannot be created or destroyed, and we're going to go somewhere. And I think that some of the spirits or energy of us has the ability to communicate with those that are still living. I don't think every person becomes a ghost. I don't think every person becomes a spirit that can communicate. I think there are certain instances where some spirits have that ability, and those are the ones that we're communicating with.
Yeah. At the end of the day, there's no real evidence, scientifically speaking, that when you die, it's literally just like turning off a computer. Mm-hmm. It's literally just an assumption. Mm-hmm. Now, when it comes to some kind of a survival of consciousness after the death of the physical body, well, there's something to go off of. I would say it's super conclusive, but because all these high strangeness phenomena, they are so elusive, and they're really
Hmm.
pushing the boundaries of our science.
Right.
But overall, at least we have something to work with. Like, for example, all the stuff that we are talking about. I mean, to say that all this, even though it's been in folklore since forever, since we are here,
Hmm.
humans. I mean, to say that all of this is just fabrication, it's just nonsense. Someone just makes it up.
Hmm.
That's too easy of an explanation. Just shoving it under the carpet like this. Now,
And I agree.
if
Yep.
yeah, and if you get into it properly and start investigating what's happening, then it really has the potential of changing our entire worldview and the way we think about reality and what it actually is. Because
Hmm.
at the end of the day, we still don't know properly.
And you're absolutely right, and that's why there are so many paranormal investigators out there that are doing some really cool things, trying
Mm-hmm.
different techniques, trying different experiments to really try to figure that out. Technology is changing. I don't think in my lifetime that we will ever have a definitive answer or a definitive way to say, okay, yes, this is what happens, or this is actually how it happens. But I think we do have some different answers.
Yeah. Again, a lot of this stuff is super elusive. Like you
Hmm.
even think of all the stuff that's been going on Skinwalker Ranch. I mean, that's at this point, it's beyond doubt that something is going on there.
Hmm.
Or even with the UFO phenomenon, it's so elusive, but
Hmm.
you can't say that you cannot say that there's nothing there, because there is evidence
Hmm.
that we have.
Yeah.
In case of UFOs, corroborated data from some of your battleships, all the things you're telling me about. I
Hmm.
mean, again, we can't just shove it under the rug and say it's all nonsense.
Right. And I think, as technology has changed, with the advent of social media and, instant sharing of information, obviously that opens the door to much different ideas and much broader communication with each other. Right.
Yeah.
You're sitting in a different country right now and we're having this conversation, that wouldn't have been heard of 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And so those early versions of paranormal experiences or UFO phenomena, you heard about it in a newspaper blip or you read
Mm-hmm.
about it in a book. But now, I mean, somebody can take a video of a supposed UFO and immediately it's uploaded and has 100 views. So that dialogue has definitely changed in the last, 20, 30 years, simply because of social media and the fact that we're more connected now as a world. And it's allowing us to get views out and different viewpoints out. So that's been a good thing about technology. But then on the flip side, you do have those people that create different conspiracy theories or really want to try to diminish what we're doing. But I think you got to obviously take the good and the bad with this, but I think there's more good that has come out of it than bad.
Yeah, I think that's a good thing to say, really,
Mhm.
because just the way that we can share information. And again, like you said, 20 years ago, maybe you would go on some kind of a TV show where you would get 5 minutes to say something, and then the host would be like, kind of half laughing about what you were saying.
Mhm.
But these days, we can just, you can start a YouTube channel, get a few million subscribers on it, and
Mhm.
we can just share stuff in between us, and there's no time limit or anything, and we can just properly discuss things. So that's
Right.
really good. But on the other
Yeah.
side, there's also, it's easier to fake videos than ever. That's also
Absolutely.
true.
Absolutely, and that's where my next statement was going to go. You do have to be cautious, because again,
Yeah.
when this really started to come into the forefront in the early 2000s with TV shows like Ghost Hunter and Ghost Adventures and such, um, it was one of those things where they had these certain techniques and they had these certain principles. And then you get into this age, to your point, where we've got TikTok videos and all of this very quick processes of information. And they really neglect the entire reason as to why we're doing this, right? Is to get good, valid research, is to allow the historic preservation of these locations to continue as well. That's why what we do, I think, is so different than a lot of people in the YouTube or the TikTok crowd, is we actually take the time to tell you the historical narrative of these locations. And that's important, because if we lose these places, then we lose the paranormal, right? If these places get demolished, then we don't have essentially these locations where we can do paranormal research. So to your point, we do have to be careful that, you're putting things out there that are legitimate, that you try to debunk first, and instead of just saying, oh my god, there's a ghost right there, and not really looking and giving data as to why that could legitimately be something. So that's something that the audience really has to gauge whether or not they're doing their research as well.
Yeah, exactly. Which is an overall intelligent approach to all these phenomena, and one that's not biased either way. Because you saw it with, on one side you have people who are too into it and can't, for example, with the UFO community, I'm using this example because I know a lot about this subject. I read, lots of books and saw all the TV series that went out, documentaries. But anyway, with ufologists, there's, for example, a certain bias towards saying that these UFOs are from another solar system, that it's kind of like some other civilization's equivalent of Apollo 11 or something. And they can't really, or for example, the ancient alien theory could be, but also can be something else. Now, you don't want to be biased. On the other hand, you have scientists who, in case of the UFO phenomena, most of the time when I heard some scientists, either when he got questioned about it, it was like, well, I haven't seen any real evidence that would suggest there's something worth looking at, but it's this idea that he got maybe from someone else, from other scientists, that there's not worth looking into it, and that's the reason why he won't look into it. Which if he would, he will find that there is some actual evidence there. Which, thankfully, that's one of the things that got me back into all these things over the last 3 years or so.
Absolutely.
Because I kind of moved away from it because there's so much to it, and many of these phenomena are so strange that some of these old explanations, like, it's just aliens from another planet, it's just like ghosts or something like that. It's probably not the entire reality of these things. So I was like, I don't even know anymore.
Yeah.
But then over the last few years, there's been so much happening. You had, for example, Bob Lazar go on Joe Rogan's podcast, which, when I was a kid, I read about him. I saw him on some documentaries. Yeah. But this was stuff from the 90s, and now 20 years later, well, 30, he's still saying the same story. Some of this stuff got, confirmed that he actually worked in that area, and lots of other things, new scientific breakthroughs, like, for example, element 115 actually existed. They managed to make a few molecules, a few atoms for a fraction of a second.
Yep.
Things like this. So that's what really got me back into it. Like, all the things that I've heard in the past, like, it actually was real. So
yeah,
it's really exciting times, to say the least.
It is. And, people really, in my mind, need to have that open mind. When you become so closed off to your own, viewpoint, then we stop having an intelligent dialogue. And, that's why when we put out our videos, we very rarely say that this is haunted. What we're trying to do with the videos is not convince anybody. I'm not putting it out there to say, I'm trying to convince you that my viewpoint on the paranormal is accurate. That's not what I'm doing. What we do is we show you how we conducted the investigation, what we did, how we controlled for everything, and then what we're left with is unexplainable. Now, if somebody wants to come back and say, "Oh, I think it's this, this, and this," then I want to have that dialogue, right? Because I do want to
Hmm.
see if we can come up with a plausible explanation to some of this. But barring that, this is unexplainable. Now, you can believe it or you don't have to believe it. You can watch our videos for the historical perspective. You can watch our videos for the paranormal perspective, but it's not something that we're trying to convince you of. We're trying to open the dialogue, right? That these things are different than what we've experienced before, right? Having some man talk to me behind in a battleship when I know that only my sister and I are standing there, right? I want to have a discussion around that, and people really, I think now we're in a time where the paranormal and cryptids and all of that, it's really moving from the mainstream to or from a subculture to the more mainstream. And to your point, I do think it's an exciting time, but we do have to be cautious of those people who would try to manufacture things to get views, to get hits and likes and subscribes, and ring
Hmm.
that bell and all of that. You really do have to do your research as well. You just can't believe everything that is put out on social media. You do need to find those people that are doing quality research and really try to again further that dialogue.
Yeah, exactly. At the end of the day, it's not about belief or anything. It's just about figuring out what's going on,
Hmm.
like actually going on, not
Hmm.
someone's idea of what's going on.
Right,
And that's a
exactly.
big difference. Yeah, May, people have way too many biases, and
Hmm.
then that includes scientists. And also a good thing to do is really educate yourself on it. Because like in my case, I might sound like a typical believer or something, but whether Bigfoot is an actual creature just living in the forest or whether it's something paranormal, I don't care. I just want to find out what's going on.
Yeah, exactly.
So on one
Exactly.
side, yeah, I'm open to these things being real. I'm being very cautious about scammers and people who just make stuff up.
Hmm.
On the other side, even though I don't might not have a degree from a uni, I am familiar with the scientific method. I know how it works. I know it can be corrupted as well. I know what kind of biases and what's the limits of it.
Yep.
So I think that puts me in a good spot where I'm not leaning either way. I just want to figure out what's going on.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think podcasts and interviews are a good way to do that, right? You have people
Oh, yeah,
on
definitely.
with yeah, you have people on that have viewpoints, and then you as the audience need to kind of weigh what those speakers are saying and kind of how they're doing their
Hmm.
method, and decide, kind of help you decide, kind of what's out there. Again, we don't have a solid theory as to what a ghost is. We don't have a solid theory as to what a UFO is or a Bigfoot, but there are people out there that are trying to do solid research on that, and you need to find those and kind of gravitate toward those.
Yeah, exactly. And there are good researchers out there who are
Mhm.
just doing great stuff, and they are not wacky in any way. Like because a lot of people think that
Hmm.
like the general idea that all this stuff is mostly nonsense, and people who research it, there's something wrong with them in a way. But
Oh
then
yeah.
if they would listen to, for example, Jacques Vallée or someone like him, like that guy is a heavyweight in terms of science.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
if he says something, you better listen.
Yeah. Exactly. When I tell
And he's
people that
not the
I'm a
only one.
paranormal invest yeah. When I tell people that I'm a paranormal investigator, they either look at me like I have two heads or they want to tell me their ghost story. And more, it's people want to tell me their ghost story. They've either seen their grandma or their uncle had this experience with something, and it that to me is really interesting because, as I said before, I think everybody has a viewpoint on death and what happens
Hmm.
after we die, and to be able to hear some of these stories, it really kind of lets me know that there are experiences out there. People have these individual experiences. They might not talk about them until they find out that somebody is a paranormal investigator or something like that. But again, it's just one of those things that furthers the dialogue.
Yeah, definitely. We definitely need to have this kind of dialogue
Hmm.
because at the end of it, like I said earlier, most people have their own biases, and you gotta, as an individual, like I said, you need to educate yourself. The more you know, the closer you're probably gonna get to a correct answer.
Mm-hmm.
Most people don't know what they don't know, so that's also something to figure out. Where are your blind spots?
Yep, that's a great
Now,
way to say that.
also, also you need to figure out, okay, do I have this opinion because I want to have them, because there's some kind of attachment to it,
Mm-hmm.
it's emotional or what have you. Like some people, for them, the idea of just dying and not existing might not be very comforting, so they're going to gravitate to the other side. Some people, atheists, which atheism is basically also just another belief, just like, and they many times act like religious people.
Mm-hmm.
So you gotta be aware of these things going on. What we really want is, like I said earlier, just find out what's going on.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so recently I was having a conversation with a good friend from the UK, and it just reminded me how like obviously there's going to be a lag between the conversation that are being held on these kinds of topics between researchers and people who are into it, and how quickly it's going to precipitate into mainstream
Right.
and normal people. Because she was saying, like, she's talking about certain things. I think it was mainly to do with some COVID stuff, and they were like, "Oh, you're into conspiracy. You probably think UFOs are real as well." And when she said that, I was like, "Well, joke's on you, because the U.S. government confirmed they actually exist."
There you
And
go.
now, how many more things are we gonna figure out over the next 10, 15, 100,000 years that we thought scientists just put on the rug like it's nonsense, but actually there's some truth to it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And again, it's one of those things that the more people talk about it and the more people do their research on it, I think the closer we're going to become to actually having answers.
Yeah, exactly. Even recently, I talked about it on a couple of other podcasts. You know, Robert Bigelow. I'm sure you heard his name.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He did this contest where it was about only professionals from their fields were able to submit essays about whether there is a afterlife or not.
Mm-hmm.
And I ended up, at one point, I downloaded Jeffrey Mishlow's, whom I coincidentally I stumbled upon on YouTube, not knowing it was him. I
Okay.
started listening to his podcast, which is just great. But anyway, so I downloaded his essay. I only read for a little bit, but there was so much in there. Like, if someone would just look at this one thing and read through it, I really don't think you'd be believing that there's just nothing, out there. And even certain things like even near-death experiences, some of the stuff people experience there, it really seems to be showing that there is something after we die, and that perhaps consciousness, and just like certain philosophies or religions say, there might be actually something eternal, something that doesn't just stop.
Right. Absolutely. And again, that's really what we approach, how we approach it. And, to your point, there's a lot of great people out there that are doing this type of research. Again, from the paranormal side to the cryptid side to the UFO side. And it is a very, very interesting time, a very, cool time to be involved with this, because we are seeing more and more people really kind of being open-minded about kind of what we do and how we do it. There's people that I know that don't believe in ghosts that watch our video and they're like, wow, you put together some very compelling evidence. I didn't really believe in this before, but that's something that I can't explain. And again, it's just one of those things that kind of opens the discussion, and that's really what we're trying to do with our research.
Yeah. And you mentioned that you also communicate with these entities, wherever it might be. So how do you do that when you actually try to have some kind of a dialogue there?
Well, with regard to the paranormal, yeah, we definitely try to have a dialogue. But we also are again open-minded about the UFOs. It's not one of those things that we really study in depth. But you listen to people like Preston Dobson. I think maybe you had him as a speaker, maybe not.
Preston Dennett.
Yeah. Sorry, yeah, wrong one.
Yeah.
Just
No
a
worries.
wealth of knowledge there as well. Um, that again, looking and listening to those individuals and having that different open mind about how these things can be interconnected. Whether or not the paranormal is something that, as I said before, is on that parallel plane, or if it's actually an entity, an energy of somebody that actually lived. Again, that's the viewpoint that we take it from. But you have to be open minded to thinking of the other theories and conjectures as well.
Yeah. Well, I think you misunderstood my question a little bit. I was asking how you communicate with the ghosts themselves.
I'm sorry. I thought we were
Like
going
open
to.
a dialogue there.
Yeah,
Well, it's all
absolutely.
right. I mean,
What we do is when we go to these locations, first of all, we go in and we say, we're here to tell your story. We're not trying to provoke you. We're not trying to incite you in any way. We really want to tell your story. And what we also do is we really research the location and we take what we call trigger items. And these are items that we think can elicit a response from a spirit. So, for example, when we were investigating Fort Mifflin in Philadelphia, they've got a subterranean room called a casemate, and they use that one of these casemates for a solitary confinement cell. So we said to ourselves, what would somebody in a solitary confinement cell want? They probably want water, they probably want food, and we'll give them a cigarette. So that's what we do. We take these trigger items into a location and we leave them there and we say, here, these are for you. We recognize that we know you were in here. If you want the water, if you want the bread, if you want the cigarette, those are yours. And we'd like to communicate with you around those things. So speaking of Fort Mifflin, there was two of us in this casemate, myself and Cara. And like I said, it's a subterranean casemate, about 7 feet underground. There's no light inside of it. There's no noise pollution inside of it. And so Cara and I were sitting down there and I said, did you see the things that we left for you? And a male's voice said, yes, thank you. And so for us, that was a positive response that elicited a response from this entity. And so that's really, we try to get the audible responses, which those to us are the most compelling, but we also have different pieces of handheld equipment designed to measure energy. So, for example, we have what we call a K2 meter. It's designed to measure electromagnetic energy. The idea being that if there's no power or energy in a room, these things theoretically should not alarm or go off in any way. But when they do, that to us is something acting on it that we can't explain. I mentioned the spirit box. We have the spirit box, which is that AM/FM radio. The theory is that spirits can use the white noise to communicate with us, and we've had some very compelling responses on that spirit box. We have something called an EDI box, which basically it has several tools in one. It has an EMF meter. It has a gyrophone. So if something touches it, it'll show the vibration on it. It has a temperature gauge. It has a pressure gauge. And so we use these things, these different handheld tools, to attempt to get a communication, to get a back and forth with these spirits.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Have you ever used someone who's sensitive to these things, or perhaps a medium or something like that?
Personally, on our investigations, we have not. Now, I do know mediums. I do know psychics. They have come to the location, the haunted location that my business partner and I run. So they have been here. I've seen them on those type of investigations. I know that they have picked up on some very interesting things here at the historic Scott County Jail. Again, things that I can't explain. For example, we had a psychic here, and up in one, because I'm sitting in a haunted jail right now. So up on the third floor, it was maximum security. And when Miranda and I are here, we feel some very interesting things in one of the cells. And so we started calling this entity Big Boy. And every time we'd go in there, hey, big boy, how you doing? And we get some interesting responses based on that. Well, this psychic did not know anything about that. She came in blind, right? Not knowing any of our stories. And so she went in there and she said, there's a entity here. You call him big boy. His name is actually Roy, and he likes when you come and talk to him. Again, no knowledge of this. This is just something that Miranda and I do when we're here. No knowledge of that. But she was able to pick up on that. We also have a cell, the one directly above me, where when the jail was in operation, a guy, an inmate, hung himself by his shoelaces. And again, it's not a common story that we tell. It's just one that, we mention every now and then, but there's no way the psychic could have known that. And she picked up on it when she went into that cell. So here I've seen the evidence of psychics that are really able to pick up on the entities here in our jail.
Mm-hmm. It was similar to the experience that I had recently. Because the recording of this podcast for you guys is pretty good, because we rescheduled like at least twice, didn't we?
Yes, we did. Yeah.
Yeah. And in the meantime, I think it was last week, I had a seance with some one of my colleagues who organized it. It was 4 of us plus the medium. I've never done anything like this before, so I just went with, obviously cautious, so it's not a scam or something, but also curious to see what happens, whether it's going to be a table moving or something like that. We did have a lamp go off, but then my friend was like, "Oh, it's just a timer." But jokes aside, that woman, the medium, she didn't know anything about any of us, really. All that my friend said to her, "There's going to be 4 of us," and that's all she knew. So when she came, we just told her our names. There was maybe one thing she could have picked up on from one of the people that was there, but overall she didn't know anything. And each one of us got some kind of a message, which this medium, she just couldn't know, but it was very spot on. Mm-hmm. In my case, supposedly my dad came over, who passed away around 3.5 years ago. And at first we weren't sure who exactly was. She just described, like, he talks a lot, or maybe a bit loud, lots of hair. It's from your father's side of the family. It's a man. I was thinking, for the entire thing, like, who could this be? Like, my family was pretty small. Mm-hmm. I don't have any siblings, neither did my dad. For my mom's family, it was totally messed up, this side of the family. So I was like, it's going to be either my dad or my grandpa. If it was something, if it was like maybe my grandpa's dad or someone, no way of knowing for me.
Gotcha.
But so for me, it was probably one of these two. It seemed more like my dad, because with my grandpa, it was a whole different story. But so at the end, I showed her a picture of my dad, and she looked at it, asked a few questions, and it seems like him. So one of the things that she said was upon they were talking about healing, and how apparently I've got healing hands. Maybe I should perhaps pursue something like that, which is very interesting, because for the last few months I've been researching a lot of stuff around healing. Because I've always been kind of interested in a way, but I think I was too focused on the physical side of it, like exercise, nutrition, those kind of things, herbs. But I kind of neglected the power of the mind, with what it's capable of. So we all heard about spontaneous remissions, right? When people do certain things, either they, for example, try a certain technique, whether it's from Joe Dispenza or the Wim Hof method, or they heal some kind of trauma that was there, and they managed to cure stage 4 cancer and really horrible diseases just through the power of the mind.
Yep.
Or this guy that I came across recently who was paralyzed for some kind of infection. It basically crushed his spinal cord. So he was paralyzed from the chest down. And 3 months later, even though the doctor was saying he can't walk anymore, like ever in his life, he did manage to walk, and now he's just fine.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I've been really researching and trying to unlock it for myself, because I've also had some issues, health issues. But I never really talked about this stuff to barely anyone.
Mm-hmm.
So I was interested in that came up, and there were also some other things that apparently my dad told me. But it was very spot on, and every other person that was there also got some kind of message that really hit home. I mean, one of the people that were there was a bit skeptical, and she ended up crying at the end. So that was pretty intense.
Yeah. Yeah, and there are so many people that have that ability. You know, like I said, we've met numerous psychics and mediums that will tell us different messages, or like I said, they'll come in the jail and not knowing anything about it, and just really be spot on with some of the stories, even down to the names. And in one case, you know, there was actually a jailer here that had a nickname that we didn't even know about until we really started delving into the research.
Mm-hmm.
And they were able to pick up on that before we knew anything about it. And to your point, the mind is a very interesting thing. And I do think that that people that have this gift, you know, it is one of those things that to me, it's fascinating.
It is. Well, it kind of seems more like these kinds of abilities, every one of us has them.
Mm-hmm.
But in most cases, they are just, there's too much noise, let's just say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of people, they just kind of blow it off, or they're not in tuned to it to really use it. A lot of people, as we know, only use 10% of their brains. And if people would really kind of research into that, I think it's amazing what individuals can do.
Yeah, definitely. I was just thinking also of small kids. Like I remember listening to our teacher. I think it was like age of 7 below or something like that. And it was actually a teacher from the Czech Republic, and she was saying about her experiences with really small kids. Because you know, small kids, they're not as indoctrinated, I'll just say, as we are. They don't have all these preconceptions like this exists, this doesn't exist, so I can't see that, so can't be this. And she was saying that she was an atheist at first, but after years of working with small kids, she became much more spiritual, because these kids, they were like telling her about past lives and knowing things that they shouldn't know. I think she even had this experience. I think it was her with her own son. I think he was autistic.
Okay.
So he didn't really speak. But at one point, she was just washing the dishes, and she was thinking about perhaps having an affair with this guy she fancied, or someone like that. And suddenly, just within her head, she heard a male voice saying, "No."
Wow.
And she's like, "What?" And then she looked to the side, and her son was just looking at her.
Wow.
And so like I was saying, it seems like we all have some kind of, even Dino Aiden, who is also a scientist, he talks a lot about these things and did some really good research. He's saying that we all have all these capabilities of accessing different realities, or remote viewing, communicating with spirits, clairvoyance, and all these things is within us. It might be coming from one single source, but it's all the noise that we have from our beliefs that we've been told by other people that, you know, like ghosts, UFOs, they don't exist. You know, you didn't live a past life. That's just nonsense. You know, the consciousness is just a epiphenomenon within your head. All these things, which then, even a friend of mine, she was on my podcast twice. She could also hear other entities and all these things, and she tried to suppress it for years, and she ended up being super depressed and everything, suicidal. But when she gave into it, that's when her life just got a lot better, you know. So it seems like we all have these capabilities, just dormant in most of us.
Hmm. And you're absolutely right. I mean, I think that's why that children are more able to see and hear entities. There's so many kids that have a quote unquote childhood friend, and in some cases, those could be a spirit communication. And because the adults are telling them, no, that can't happen, you can't believe that, da 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 da, you get that bias where I'm not supposed to believe that can't happen. But children are much more open-minded until they get to that point where essentially what they've been told starts to take over. And because I mean, I've heard
Yeah,
numerous
exactly.
stories. Yeah, I've heard numerous stories about again, that childhood friend that turned out to be something in the house that obviously the child, this 1, 2, 3-year-old child, had no way of knowing, yet he's telling these things that happened in the house prior to the family moving in. And I've watched different shows about past lives as well. And again, children are more susceptible and open-minded to that. It's not until they become more on the adult side and that adult bias takes over that they really change and lose that ability.
Yeah, exactly. And it's when you tell your kid, hey, oh, you're just making it up, it was just a dream or something like that, the kid's gonna suppress it and obviously not gonna share much because you're gonna see that it's not worthwhile telling your parents about it if they just gonna dismiss it all.
Mm-hmm.
And because kids are still in development, all these neural connections which would enable them to see all these things, they go atrophy because they're not being used anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely.
Which is a shame, really.
Yeah,
Because I think this is what we really need in our society, is some kind of a connection to each other, to the universe, to wherever all this came from.
mm-hmm. Yeah,
Some kind of, it's like what Dennis McKenna said: we are super smart, but we are not wise.
exactly. Yeah, that's a
So
great way to
we
say that.
definitely need more spirituality in our lives.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Right. So, what's your opinion then? What is going on here? Because if you look at all these phenomena from a strictly materialistic reductionist view, they really can't exist. There's no possible way that we know of that this could be an actual real thing. So, what do you think, more from a scientific, more or less, point of view? What do you think is an explanation for these things?
For me personally, we operate on the theory that one, energy cannot be created or destroyed. So that energy has to go somewhere. I will say that I'm a Christian, so I believe that most spirits, when they die, will ascend to whatever's next, and I'll call that heaven. But I do believe that there's instances where the spirit is allowed to communicate and remain behind. The first reason is I do think that there's unfinished business, that something has to be fulfilled before that spirit or that soul can ascend to the next realm. We see this in popular television shows, but I do believe that is a thing. The second one is that they know they're dead, but they can't find a way to get to that next realm. I think we see that a lot with children. For example, we are investigating the Hales Bar Dam, which is a dam in Guild, Tennessee, and it was an operation from 1913 till 1962. And underneath this dam, there's a series of tunnels that run under the river. And school kids would use those tunnels to get from one side to the other to go to school. In the 1950s, there was an accident, and a couple of these school kids were killed in the tunnels. And so when we were investigating, Michelle asked the question, why are you here? Why haven't you moved on? And we got a child's voice saying, I can't, I'm stuck. And so I think, I think he knows he's dead, but for some reason he can't find whatever's next. And then, the third theory that we work on is like I said, they have that they have a message that they need to tell, and maybe that's their unfinished business. But there's some communication that has to take place first. So, for example, my granddaddy died in 1983 or 1986, and I was very close with my grandmother. We called her Nana, and so in 2016, my Nana had an accident, And so right before that accident, about 2 weeks before, I had a very vivid dream that Granddaddy came to me, and in the dream I said, "What do you want?" And he said, "I'm waiting on your Nana. You're going to be getting a call soon." So about 2 weeks after that dream, we got a call that my Nana had had an accident, and she ended up getting MRSA, and she never really recovered. So we ended up putting her into hospice. And in the dream, it was a very specific spot in the house that they used to live in. And when she died, I I looked at my sister like an hour after she died. I looked at my sister and I said, I know where she's going. She's going to go meet up with Granddaddy in that spot in the house. And so, with my family's permission, we went to the house. We had our K2 meters. I had a gray one and a black one. Again, these are the things that measure energy. And I said, so we went to the house and we went to the spot that was depicted in the dream. It was right outside of his home office, right in the doorway. And so, again, we had the 2 meters. The power had been turned off. And so we're sitting there. And I'm started asking questions. I'm like, Nana, are you here? And both of the K2 meters started going off, right? Energy was acting on it somehow. And I said, to confirm that it's you, just go to the black meter. And just the black meter lit up. I said, okay, stop it there and go to the gray meter. Gray meter lit off. And they're only about 1.5 feet apart. And just the gray meter lit up. And I said, are you here with Granddaddy? Both of them started going off. And so for me, Granddaddy's unfinished business was waiting on Nana. And then when she passed, they ascended together because we went back 2 weeks later, did the exact same experiment with the exact same tools, asked the exact same questions, and didn't get any responses. And so that to me is what I feel was his unfinished business. So I'm not going to look for Nana and Granddaddy again because I don't think they're here with us. I don't think their energy is here with us anymore. So that's really the main theory that we operate on, that there's some type of communication that needs to be fulfilled.
Right. See. Man, that was an interesting story.
Yeah.
Whilst we're on it, might as well say two of my stories. Well, one is not mine. Mainly because if people, when they listen to something like this, or for someone they know, it gets them to think.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if someone's sharing their personal experience. The first one, it's from the previous episode with Tim Lodgen. So I was talking to him, and he was telling a story how he went through a lot of addictions and stuff. 27 years of alcohol addiction, which he finally managed to overcome. Mm-hmm. Great story. Episode 18.
Okay.
Yes. So he was saying that one day he went up with his car to this place where it was near where one of his friends died in the 90s.
Okay.
Right. So he went there and he broke down. He was crying, and then he parked in the wrong direction on the street, on the road, on the side of it, and another car pulled up right in front of him, and he looked at the guy behind the steering wheel. And it was his friend who passed away in that spot. It was his dad, and he hasn't seen him since his friend's funeral.
Wow.
So, he got out of the car. They met, and it's like, Tim, is it you? Like, yeah. And turns out, his friend's dad, he told him he wasn't supposed to be there that day, but he had a dream where his wife told him to go to that spot. He was meant to be actually in a different state in the US.
Wow.
So through a dream, he got this message to go there, and that's where he met Tim.
Wow.
So it was like crazy. Like, how do you explain something like this in like scientific terms?
Right.
There's something we are definitely missing.
Agreed.
In science. And dreams are a big thing for me. I think that's kind of like when, you definitely seem to be connected a bit more. The connection seems a bit better when you're dreaming than when you are awake.
Yeah.
With whatever else is out there.
Right.
Well, so many of my dreams, they come true sometimes within a day or two. It's happening more often to me. I have also lucid dreams, but the most interesting dream that I had was to with my ex's sister. She was like half my age.
Okay.
In her teens, So I had this dream where I was in I found myself in an abandoned house. It was kind of American style,
Okay.
Pretty big, spacious, not more like these European houses. And it was very desolate inside, like either unfinished or it was just uninhabited for like a long time. So it was like debris all over the place and dust and sand or whatever. At first I felt a little bit afraid, but then I was like, "No, it's fine." So I kind of shook it off. And hold on. The way I got there first was through like a tunnel or something.
Okay.
Yeah, it kind of reminded me the beginning of Event Horizon, if you remember the movie.
Okay.
The very beginning of the movie, kind of similar.
Okay.
Kind of hazy, bluish tunnel. So I got to the house. I was there. Yeah, I kind of knew that this is my ex's. Well, we were at this point still together. It was her sister's. Her sister's subconscious or something like that.
Okay.
I kind of knew that, so I did a few steps, looked around, and then she came running out of a different room, and we hugged each other. And then I think I was also at one point outside of the house, but then either the dream changed or something. And she seemed kind of scared, when she came running to me.
Mm-hmm.
So I woke up and I ended up writing a text message in a group chat. Turns out one of her biggest fears was the fear of abandonment.
Wow.
Which she never told us before.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah. Wow.
And I think she also had like a weird dream that night. And it's like, did I really access her subconscious somehow whilst I was dreaming?
Mm-hmm.
Or
wow. That's fantastic. That's a great story.
How do you explain something like this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, dreams are definitely interesting. That's when you're sleeping, that's obviously when you're the most vulnerable, but that's also when you're the most open, right? Because you're not influenced by sight or sound or touch as you are during the day, right? So I think dreams are extremely powerful, and I don't think a lot of people put that much credence into them. But for me, I love to dream. I love dream interpretations. For me, my dreams are extremely vivid. And to your point, there's been several that manifest in real life, either a couple days after or something about the dream will manifest. But I will say the one with Granddaddy, that was more almost like a vision to me. Like I could tell you how he smelled. I could tell you what he was wearing. I mean, even the way the drawstring on his pants were tied, because he was wearing like athletic pants. The pictures on the wall behind him, I can tell you every single picture that was on the wall behind him. And so that to me was more like a vision. But for me, dreaming is something that's very interesting. And I love talking about dreams with people.
Yeah, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the thing is, when you were saying that it was more like a vision and you could see all the details.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the things I've learned doing lucid dreaming. I never really managed to get them through like doing some kind of technique. It just came spontaneously to me after reading a book.
Mm-hmm.
So I had a few of those. But one thing I realized there is that when you wake up, it looks like an old memory. It's fading and it's blurry and hazy and all that. But whilst you are in a dream, which for those who don't know, if you have a lucid dream, it means you become conscious of the fact that you are dreaming whilst you are still dreaming.
Mm-hmm.
So in a few of these dreams that I had a good look around. I kind of tried to calm myself down so I don't wake up. I looked around and it looks exactly like this reality. All the detail in it. I remember looking at the ground somewhere in a forest. It's kind of darkish, but I could still see every small rock on the ground, all the dirt, all the dead leaves. There was so much detail in it.
Mm-hmm.
And then also you have different kinds of dreams. You got the normal ones, which are, all of them can be either lucid or non-lucid. You got normal ones, then you got this other kind where you get some kind of you can get some kind of teaching from someone, from who knows what kind of entity. You can see the future or something happening to another person or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And then you, according to the Tibetans, you can have even an experience of whatever this reality is coming out of, you know, as you know, the unity with the entirety of the universe.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot to it.
Yeah, there is a lot to it. But like I said, for me, I love dreams. And I do think it's something that I wish more people would put a little bit more thought behind, because like I said, when you think about it, it's you are vulnerable in that state, but you're open to all of these different things your bias when you're sleeping, your bias is out the window, right? And everything is possible in that moment when you're sleeping. So yeah, I think that
Exactly.
and that's when your mind is the most active, really. And so instead of using just the 10% or whatever while you're in your wake state, you're using much more when you're sleeping.
Exactly, and all the parts of your brain which process all the information coming from outside of you,
Yep.
they are shut down.
Yep.
But the parts of the brain which construct your reality, because there's also a misconception that people think that we just look out into the outside world and we perceive it as it is, but that's so not true.
No.
You project at least as much out there, and we construct it, our reality. So everything we see is actually just in our heads, and we have actually no idea what's outside.
Yep, you're absolutely right.
So yeah, doing our dreams, this world making process, it's literally the same as when we are awake. It's very interesting.
Absolutely.
Right. That was super interesting. So at the end, I usually ask my guests a few questions. So the first one, if there was one advice you could give to people, what would it be?
I think when just strictly talking on the paranormal, I would say just to have an open mind about it and really do your research. Don't base your opinions on what you see on TikTok or what you see on Instagram, but really look at different sources and try to gain your knowledge from that, and form your belief structure based on that.
Mm-hmm. Great. Solid advice. And second question, what do you think is the meaning of life?
For me, I think the meaning of life is to, one, really enjoy it and live your best life. We talked about influences a little bit, and I think a lot of people get so influenced by everything, right? By your work, by your family, by social media, and it really causes you to lose you. And I think that if you get lost in other people's interpretation of you, then you lose yourself. And so for me, like, for example, running this business here, this museum, and what we call a paranormal research center, obviously completely different than anything I ever thought I'd be doing with my life, but this is what makes me happy. And this is what I think I'm meant to do. And so I think finding that and be happy in what you're doing far outweighs the mundane day to day of doing something that somebody tells you have to do.
Definitely. And where can people find you?
So www.soulsistersparanormal.com. That's our website. We're also very active on Facebook under Soul Sisters Paranormal, and our YouTube channel is Soul Sisters Paranormal.
Okay, great. Well, that was super interesting talking to you. Thank you much for your time. I hope you guys really enjoy this episode. So make sure you give it a like, subscribe, share. It's really appreciated.
Thanks, Elvis. I hope you have a great day.
You too.